Hey everybody, this is Kawar. I'm going to be your instructor for this video on networks. This is the first video in this series that takes a look at the introduction to what a network is. It's basically a video that you start your journey into the networking field, and I am excited to bring this video to you guys. And in this video we'll get started, and I transport you back to an era that what we see today in networks did not exist, and then slowly build up the definitions of what a network is, what are the uses of networks. We'll take a look at the different ways of connecting the network to each other. So let's begin. The first thing I want to talk about is what happened prior to the networks being there. Well, how do we do computing prior to networks being there? When I started in the industry in the early 90s, networks did not exist. It was basically standalone devices that would have limited resources, maybe a printer, small amount of memory that you would scoff at if when you talk about it, if you hear about it. Like in my first personal computer that I had, the first PC that I had 4 megs of memory, not gigs, 4 megs of memory. And I was ecstatic about it because it was a lot of memory in those days. I had a 40 meg hard drive, not a gig hard drive, and it was more than enough to hold the data that I had at that time. So when I went to work, in terms of a work environment, you would have these standalone devices that would that would basically do computing for the office work, like create a letter, do word processing on it, maybe create a spreadsheet in terms of the accounts. The application that existed where WordPerfect was the word processor of the time. Lotus 123 was the spreadsheet application of the time. Those are basically the application that you had. But as computing came into our lives, especially at the workplace, more and more applications came about, and that's where the need for networking came about. So in this particular video, what we'll do is we'll take a look at how the initial networks are formed. We'll take a look at the definition of what a network is, the different ways of connecting the networks, network types, basically connecting using cables, wireless, a hybrid, a combination of the two. And at the end, we'll take a look at a review of what we have covered in this particular video. One of the things that I want you guys to be aware of, keep your mindset along that lines, is that whenever you're taking a look at the video, rather than looking the amount of information that you need to study, when you're looking at a particular video, just focus on the topics of that video. I promise you, if you take a look at the video itself, approach it at one video at a time, by the time all the videos are done, you will have a complete knowledge of all the different aspects of networking. But it cannot be done overnight. It'll be done one step at a time. And this is your first step. All right. So coming back to what I was talking about in terms of the initial networks, let's go ahead and take a look at what used to exist in that era. And then I'll show you the slideshow as well in terms of making you understand the definitions that I will go through over here. So as I said, when you went into an office in those days, you would have a PC, maybe multiple personal computers, and one of those computers would have an attached printer to it. You would have a local hard drive, and storage space was very expensive those days. I remember getting my second hard drive was about an 85 meg hard drive for about $200 at that time. This is back in the early 90s. So if I had a 40 meg hard drive over here, I could only store so much of data. And if the same data needed to exist on multiple devices, I would need to use a removable media like a floppy disk, which would basically hold up to 1.4, to be exact, 1.44 megabytes of data. And I would copy my files onto it and give it to my friend who would access the same file. So the same file existed in both locations. And the printers, if I wanted to print something, I would copy the file onto a floppy, move to the computer that had the printer connected to it, open the file up, and then print the document over here. So a very manual approach of sharing information or data with each other. And that's where the need for networking arose, to connect these different networks or these different devices to each other in a way that sharing would become a lot simpler and more efficient to do. So initially when the networks came about, what they did was they used a special type of cable to connect these devices to each other. This type of cable was known as an RG58U cable, which was a coaxial cable, the old cable TV cable types. And the way it would connect up, you would have to buy a new adapter for your PC called the NIC, the network interface card, and each device would have to have this new adapter in it. And this adapter would have a special connector that would connect it into this coax cable. The coax cable that you would connect, it would connect into what was known as the T connector. The T connector had two ends to it, three ends actually. One end would go into the adapter, the NIC, and the other end would go into the running cable. So I would run a cable over here between this T connector to the other PC. On the other PC again, I would have a T connector, which would have one end of the cable over here, and the other end would keep on going to the other NIC. At the end, to indicate the end of the cable, I would have what was known in those days as the terminator of the cable. So on this T connector, I would have two cables connected. On the two edges, I would have a terminator indicating the end of the cable. The problem with this type of setup was if I could not, when I did a communication or a transmission, if I could not see the terminator, the whole network would come down. So just in case there was a break over here, the entire network would go down, because when I was transmitting, I could not see the end of the NIC cable. So even the two devices over here, let's say PC1 and PC2, even these two PCs could not communicate to each other, although the cable break was between PC2 and PC3. So slowly, this type of cabling model went away. All right. This gave way to a better way of doing networking, which was using a device in the middle called the hub. So rather than having this bus type architecture, we went to more of a star type architecture in which each device would connect up into a central device known as a hub, or also sometimes referred to as a multi-port repeater. Repeater basically was a device that would take a transmission and repeat it, or send it to the other devices. Basically, it was just an unintelligent device that would take a signal and send it to all the other devices connected to the hub. The cabling changed. It changed from the RG58U cable to the RJ45 cable, which was the unshielded twisted pair cable, the UTP cable, that connected your PC, PC1, PC2, and PC3. All the three devices would connect to the central device called the hub, and because they were connected to the hub, they would connect to each other. Now, in this type of setup, the good part about it was, just in case one device went down, it did not break the entire network down, because PC2 could still communicate to PC3. So it was a better way of doing things, easier to troubleshoot. Fault isolation was there. But the problem with the hub was that when this device sent a transmission, because it was an unintelligent device, the transmission would go into the hub. Hub would send the traffic, even if it was just meant for PC2, it would be sent to all the other devices. So unnecessarily, PC3 would have to listen to transmissions that were really meant for PC2. So quickly, they changed this media, they optimized this media or this device from a hub to a more intelligent device called a switch. The functional difference between the two devices was the intelligence that was built into the switch, in the sense that when PC1 sent the traffic, which was destined for PC2, the switch would look at the destination and forward the packet only to PC2. So if PC1 wanted to communicate to PC2, it would not send the traffic to the other PCs as well. So it would allow multiple devices to communicate at the same time. So this was the central device, and even today, most of the wired networks that you guys have are using some form of a switch to connect these devices to each other. All right, so this is how networking started. Now, why did I do networking again in the first place? because if I did not have networking, the resources that I had were isolated to the standalone device that I had, my disconnected PC, the personal computer. So if I had a printer connected over here, if I did not have a network, I would need to do that copying of the file onto the floppy, moving the floppy manually to the PC to print it out. So by doing this, now I had the ability to take a print job, open the file up on my PC, and send that file through the network to PC3 to print it out. So this allowed us the ability to share our hardware resources like a printer across the network. The other thing that it also did, now rather than saving the files on local hard drives, I could get a more sophisticated device known as a server and put a bigger storage device or put a bigger hard drive over here and allow all the different devices to store their files on this centralized hard drive. So if PC1 had a file that it needed the other guys to view or look at or share, he would share or he would store the file on the hard drive, which was easily accessible by anyone on the network. This type of service was known as a file service, and this server was called the file service. So the initial networks that you guys had were based on this file serving capability and the print serving capability. So these were your initial networks. This was the initial need for networking. This is how the networks evolved in the early ages. Now it has gone to a different level. Once these networks came about, they connected it up to each other, which is what we know as the internet. It's not just now used for sharing files or sharing storage space. It is used for other things as well, communicating to each other by sending emails to each other, communicating to each other by virtual chats on WhatsApp or Snapchat, applications that connect different networks to each other, which is the internet, to share resources with each other. Not only that, information. If I want to go to a place, let's say I want to visit a place, before I even go there, I want to find out what the weather is in that place. What are the different places that I want to go and visit or view in that location? I can find that information on the network. So information sharing became essential by connecting these devices to each other. Now I could put up information that could be used by other users of the network. All right? So this is what networking did for us. Now let's go back and take a look at the definitions of these networks real quick, now that you understand a little bit about how the networks came about. So I'll start with the initial networks. As I said, the initial networks were what? Standalone devices. Every device had its own resources, whether it was a hard drive, whether it was a printer, it was all directly connected to that device. And the only device that could use it was the device it was connected to. So the resource was directly connected to the device. That included the printers, storage devices, scanners, which was a device that was used a lot in those days. What happened with this was the loss of productivity. What do I mean by that? Again, as I said, as I explained to you, if I wanted to print a file and I did not have the printer directly connected to me, I would have to copy the file onto the floppy, take the floppy to the device that was connected to the printer, open the file up and print it. That's this option over here. This is what I'm talking about over here. This, again, as I said, was not efficient way of doing networking. This is where the networking helped connect the devices to each other. And that's what I explained to you guys in my initial set that we talked about. Now, that's where the networks came about, and that is what a network is over here. It's basically a number of computer systems, devices like printers connected to each other. You can connect the devices using the physical cables, like the switch that I talked about. And in a bit, I'll also talk about the wireless connections, how the wireless connections made it even easier for these devices to connect to each other. The main objective of that was to share hardware, like printers or input devices like scanners, your storage space, which is your hard drive. We again talked about that already. The file servers. And then it evolved into a different level when the internet, where you connected all the different networks to each other, allowed us the ability to write emails, letters to each other, instant messaging like WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, or chat rooms, where you could chat with your friends in a shared chat room. Not only that, nowadays you also have the ability to leverage the cloud services of companies where you don't need to install software packages on your devices. You can actually use word processing or spreadsheet applications or your the presentation slides on an app on the cloud, where you don't need to actually install the word processor on your device. You use the software package that is actually installed on the cloud. Examples of these services are services like the G Drive, the Google applications, the suite of applications that Google gives you, or Microsoft also provides the same capability with their service for OneDrive. So you don't even need to install the applications. Yes, you need to pay for it, but it's a subscription-based model rather than just installing it and using your resources on your device. So this is what the networks are all about. Now, the different ways of connecting the networks, we talked about one of the ways to do it is the wired, where the cable is connecting in. Let's take a look at that. First, the wired network, and then we'll take a look at the wireless as well. So what is a wired network? In which basically the devices like your computer, your printer, are all connected to each other using cables. So they're connected into the network, and at the center of this network is your switch. Although I've also mentioned a hub, nowadays you probably will not find a hub. If you want to find a hub, you'll probably have to go to a computer museum to find a hub or a very old network. Nowadays, most of the time, the central device in your network is going to be a switch. And I already explained the difference between a hub and a switch. Now, what does it look like? Let me give you that as well. A hub, I'm not going to show, but let's take an example of a switch over here. So I've shown you two images over here. This is what a normal switch would look like. This is the actual image of what a switch will look like. It would have different ports. It would connect your PCs, your laptops, your servers, your printers to this central device known as a switch. And because they're all connected to each other, you would allow the different devices to talk to each other. Now, although this is the physical image of the switch, in most of the network diagrams, the stencil, the image that they use representing the switch is not going to be this. They're going to depict the switch using this image or this icon. So get used to seeing it like that. So whenever you see an image like that, you need to know this is a switch that is connecting all these different devices, whether it's PCs or your servers or your printers, to each other. So you would take that RJ45 cable, or if you have the newer cables, which are called the fiber optic cables, the fiber cables, which gives you higher speeds to connect the devices to each other on a wired network. Now, the problem with the wired network was that in order to set the wires up, sometimes it becomes hard to do that because you need to run the cables. Running the cables, if you keep them over the floor, can trip somebody up, looks very clunky. So one of the things that you would do is you would run them under the floor, maybe in the ceilings, through the walls. So your network, your building, your office environment needed to be set up with these cables pre-installed. So to get around that, they said, why don't we use radio frequencies to send the signal, send the data across, rather than using these wires, which caught on pretty quick. And nowadays, most of the networks, most of the new networks, try to stay away from the wiring, especially towards the end users, and instead use a wireless network to connect the devices to each other. What's the advantage of a wireless network? Basically using radio waves rather than wires to communicate between the nodes. So you don't need to have any clunky wires all over the place. Made it easier to deploy a new network, bring up a new network quicker. So this is one of the common, more popular ways of connecting the different devices at this particular time. Although you do that for your end users, your servers, your bigger devices are still using the wires to connect up, but you're eliminating a big portion of it. In your home networks, though, this is the most common way of connecting the different devices to each other. So what is the device that connects them to each other? Do the devices talk directly to each other? Generally not. What they do is, just like you have a hub or a switch in a wired network, in a wireless network you have this device known as a wireless access point, which is equivalent to your switch in your wired network. So you set it up in the middle, you use wireless adapters. The NIC that you get is not a wired NIC, it's a wireless NIC. It will allow you to transmit using this wireless capability, allowing different devices that are using wireless to talk to each other. All right. Same concept, same connectivity. The only difference is rather than using a wire to connect up, I'm using a wireless communication mechanism, which is your radio frequencies, to talk between the different devices. I've given you just one example of what a wireless access point would look like. You have PCs using wireless communication to talk to each other. Because they're all connected to this same central access point, they will be able to use each other's resources. Even the printers in today's day and age come with the wireless capability built in. So by doing this, I'm getting away from the clunky nature of wires and allowing me to set up my network in a quick, easy manner. All right. But the thing is that you still have a lot of old networks that would still have some aspect of their network which is wired. So that's where the hybrid network comes in. What is a hybrid network? A hybrid network is where you have some element of the network which is wired and the other element is wireless. So the wireless access point would connect all the wireless devices to each other, but at the same time, the wireless access point would have a cable connecting the wireless access point to the switch, allowing the bridge between the wireless communication and the wired communication. An example of that, again, on a network topology, now that you've seen what a switch looks like, what an access point looks like, would look something to this, to the effect of this, where you have wireless networks connecting all the wireless devices to your access point over here using wireless media. Once it's connected over there, the wireless access point would have a wire going into the switch, allowing the communication between the wired devices to the wireless devices. This is a very typical type of environment in most of your offices in today's day and age, where you have an element of wired devices as well as a wireless access point. Although in a home network, you probably are not going to see a switch. You're probably going to see a wireless access point connecting all the different devices to each other. This is a typical office environment that you'll be exposed to as we go through it. So again, to recap, what we talked about in this particular video was an introduction to networks. Why do networks exist? What is the use of networks? What are the main resources that are used on a network? And then we took a look at the different ways of connecting the network to each other. Let's do a small review over here. I have some basic questions over here. What is a network? Basically, connecting two or more devices. That might be a computer, a laptop, maybe a smartphone, maybe a tablet to each other to share information and resources with each other. What type of resources do I have that I can share? You can share storage spaces, the hard drives. You can share printers, scanners with each other. In terms of information in the form of maybe emails, accessing the internet and finding out information about different locations that you want to visit. Maybe how do you do a certain task, maybe make a dish for yourself. You have information on the internet with recipes on doing cooking. You have information about maybe going in, let's say I want to do a small little task like make a door. You have videos on that on the internet. That's information sharing that you have. So emails, chatting with your friends, that's another aspect of information sharing. Chats. You have instant messaging like WhatsApp. All the different type of things that you can do on the internet or on a network. Now, what type of device connects the devices on a wired network? We talked about that as well. That would be a switch. And what type of device connects the devices on a wireless network? That would be an access point. So now that we know what a network brings to the table, in the next video, we'll take a look at the different types of networks that we have. And in that particular video, we'll take a look at the definition of what a personal area network is, what a local area network is, what is a metropolitan area network, or a wide area network. So you'll take a look at the different classifications of a network in the next video. Hope you enjoyed it. As I said, at this point, all I want you guys to understand is what I've talked about in this video. As we go through the different videos, you'll build your information to a level that you'll be an expert in this particular field. Hope you enjoyed it. See you in the next video.